Lightroom's graduated filter tool is really useful for making selective adjustments to different areas of your image, and it comes in particularly handy for landscapes. If we take our image here into the develop module, notice how the graduated filter sits in the toolbar to the top right of the interface here, and when we click on it, it opens up a set of new sliders directly below the tool. Now these are not to be confused with the sliders in the basic panel down here. Notice how the sliders in the basic panel are very similar. So we have exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites and blacks, clarity and the like. Now if we go up to the graduated filter sliders, see they are very similar, but the difference is we can apply these selectively to certain parts of our image. The way it works is we define an area using the tool and use the sliders to adjust that area, and we can do that in any order. So we could define the area first and then adjust it, or load the tool with perhaps some negative exposure by dragging the exposure backwards and then define our area. And we define the area simply by dragging between 2 points. Notice how if I drag down from the sky here, how we get 3 lines, and we can rotate them if we like just by moving as we drag, or if we want to keep our lines perfectly horizontal, we can hold shift and that will snap those lines so that I can get a horizontal grad, which is what I want here with the sky. Because my horizon is level, I want my graduated blend to be level, and what we're getting here is a blend between the negative exposure, which is this area here, and the untouched image, which is this area beyond our third line here. And in this area here in between, we get a blend between the before and the after. And if I hit O on my keyboard, this will bring up a mask overlay, or you can simply go to the option down here to show selected mask overlay, and that will bring up a pink overlay. And you can see here, this is what's happening. We're getting a blend between the area that's affected, which is the pink area, and the area that remains unaffected. And we can hit O again to hide that area. Now the great thing is we can adjust any of these settings at any point. So let's say, for example, I want to up the clarity just to bring out some of that detail in those clouds there. I can do that and perhaps maybe go slightly darker, add a touch of saturation to bring out the blues. We could even perhaps just knock the temperature down slightly to increase the blues even more. And everything remains editable. Now we're not restricted to a single grad, we can add several if we like. For example, I might want to add one down here because I find the rock at the edge of the frame here slightly distracting, so I can use a second grad down here and drag in from the corner to darken down that area. Now at the moment it's applying the same settings that we used over the sky, which is not what I want. So I can double click the effect slider here to reset all of the sliders, or I can double click individual sliders to reset them. In this case I'll double click effect, and notice how all of my sliders are zeroed. And I can then apply another setting. So I could perhaps just darken down that corner very slightly just to draw the eye away from those distracting rocks and towards the lighthouse. So you can use grads in this way. It's not just for darkening skies, you can also just draw the eye towards areas of the image that you want to accentuate. Now, our eyes are drawn to lightest areas first, and this area down here, again, it's drawing my eye away from the lighthouse. So I'm going to add a third grad by dragging in from this corner here. And again, I can double click effect to reset it. And if I drag the exposure down, the sea just starts to look a little bit muddy. So in this instance, what I'm going to do is knock back the clarity, which will soften that area very slightly. And that will just de-emphasize it. We could perhaps just try bringing the highlights down slightly as well. So you can see how grads are really useful for making these subtle changes to the tones in different areas of your image. And in particular, this is really helpful for landscapes because skies are typically much brighter than land. So if we expose for the land, then the sky goes too bright. If we expose for the sky, then the land goes too dark. The problem is if anything juts up into the sky, like the lighthouse here, it also gets affected. But there's a solution. Notice in the tool options over here, we have a brush option. If we grab that, and let's just zoom in slightly closer here, we'll go for a 1 to 3 to zoom in. And if I hit O to view that mask overlay again, you can see how, as you'd expect, the pink area is covering the lighthouse along with everything else. But we can use the brush to brush in or out areas to add them or subtract them from the mask. So we can go to the brush settings down here below our sliders, and we can choose a size for our brush, a feather and a flow, as well as these sections down here for auto mask and density. Now if we check auto mask, this will mean our brush tool snaps onto edges in our image, so it's helpful when we're painting over solid shapes like the lighthouse here. So if I wanted to add to the lighthouse, I could paint to add it into the darkening effect to darken down the whole area, but of course that's not what I want. I want to subtract it from the darkening effect so that it stays light. And so I'm going to set my brush to erase and then paint over this area here. And I can use the left and right square bracket keys on my keyboard here to resize my brush tip. So I'll just paint more precisely along here. I can also click to paint and then hold shift and click over a second point to draw a straight line between those 2 points, which also helps when we're trying to paint over straight lined objects like the lighthouse here. And of course, if you go wrong, you can just switch back to your A or B brush and then paint to add to the area. Or you can hold Alt, which will allow you to switch between, if you're using the erase brush, you can switch back to the add brush. And if you're using the add brush, it allows you to switch to the erase brush. And while we're at it, we could also erase the effect over our buildings here. So in this case, I'll uncheck auto mask just to paint freehand and paint quite loosely over the buildings here and over the rocks. And now let's zoom back out and let's minimize our panel here so we get a better idea of how our image is looking. And we'll hit O to hide that mask overlay. And now you can see the lighthouse has been subtracted from that darkening effect. So this is really useful anytime you have an object that juts into your horizon. One last thing here, you can also change the position of your grad simply by dragging them. So we could move them inwards or outwards to fine tune their position until we're happy. And I think we'll finish off with a couple of tweaks to the basic tones down here. So we could perhaps up the contrast slightly. Let's up the vibrance and add a touch more clarity. And that's our finished image. So there we go. That's how you can use the graduated filter to selectively adjust different areas of your images. And if we compare a before and after of our image, you can see the difference a few simple adjustments can make.